alternate on the health department board, is also has experience having run an elderly care facility for a number of years where she dealt with a number of folks with memory care issues. So I'd like to ask for a motion to appoint Emily to the North Shore Health Department Dementia and Alzheimer's Consortium for a 2-year appointment.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Alderman Gellhardt, seconded by Alderman Bailey. Any further discussion? Alderman Doherty?
Actually, registered nurse. So
She's also a
It's
registered-
more, it's deeper than just running one. She's actually a registered nurse
Right.
that teaches.
Right, at on our RN and also an RN professor, yep. Did you have anything you want to, okay. All right, all those in favor of approving the appointment, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. The next several items, I'm going to turn it over to Carl. We do have the chief as well. They'll have to do with the fire department, things we have to pass every fall as we get ready for the upcoming year. So I'll turn it over to Carl.
Thank you, Mayor Kennedy. The first item on here for North Shore fire approval is the establishment of the 2024 fee schedule. The fee schedule is in the form of a resolution. This is an annual item that all municipalities in the North Shore Fire are required to approve. So we'll take any questions or motions on this one.
Any questions? I get a motion that adopt the North Shore Fire Department.
So moved.
Second.
Alderwoman Shaw, second by Alderman Schmelzing. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Carries. Next item is a resolution allowing for member municipalities to use the levy limit exception.
Thank you again, Mayor Kennedy. So the Wisconsin law allows the increases for the North Shore Fire District in municipal budgets to be exempt from the current levy limitations in Wisconsin. Because we have a joint fire district with the 6 other North Shore communities, we're allowed to make this exemption. Fortunately, Glendale doesn't need that this year, but all municipalities are required to do it for anyone to take advantage of it if they need it.
Questions? Get a motion then to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Alderwoman Shaw, second by Alderman Doherty. Seeing no further discussion, we'll call for a vote. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Carries. And a resolution to adopt Amendment 9 to the amended and restated North Shore Fire Department Agreement.
Thank you again. In the memo that Chief Whitaker has drafted, there's this is Amendment 9 to the North Shore Fire Agreement. It basically clarifies various things and appointments and changes in some clarification language in the agreement. If anyone has any specific questions, I believe Chief Whitaker is on the call to take those questions to Amendment 9.
I believe these were just essentially putting into proper terminology a couple of practices that we had, like when we elect the officers of the board and some of those things. It was minor cleanup language. It doesn't, nothing substantive, just making sure that what's actually in the agreement is what we actually practice. So. All right, can we get a motion then to adopt the resolution that would adopt Amendment 9 of the amended and restated North Shore Fire Department Agreement?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Shaw. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Gellhardt. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. All right, next item, item 4G is a resolution establishing city procedures for securing election equipment, systems, software, and data, and restating city enforcement of state statutes protecting election workers, voters, and polling places. So I was working with a third-party organization that has concerns about how election equipment is stored, who has access to it, and what kind of procedures are put in place to maintain that equipment, as well as training for our poll workers and proper procedures. A lot of stuff is already contained in state statute, but what we have not done as a city prior to tonight was adopt any sort of official set of procedures to help guide the clerk. It's essentially what does Megan and her staff do, and putting that into writing. So I sent the language I got to Megan. Megan made a number of changes and recommendations to it. We then sent it to Nathan. Nathan has reviewed it as well. So that what's before us tonight is essentially just a resolution that says that all of our equipment's going to be under lock and key. It's going to be under video surveillance, key fob access only. We're going to know who has access to anything at any time. No one's going to make copies of the hard drives and stuff like that. So no one can tamper with ballots and tamper with any of the machinery. So any questions before we ask for a motion? Okay, can I get a motion then to adopt the resolution, please?
So move.
Thank you. Moved by Alderman Doherty. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Vukovic. All right, all those in favor of adopting the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next is an authorization to execute a professional services agreement with Astera for water leak detection services, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Warwick.
Thank you, Mayor Kennedy. So at previous city council meetings, we have discussed various aspects of the city's water system, and in reviewing some of the data revolved around when we were going to change the billing cycle, we also reviewed the quote unquote lost water that the city has, which is water that we purchase from North Shore Water Commission, goes through our water system and does not make it to somebody's meter, so they're paying the bill on it. Right now in 2022, our lost water was 15.47%. Prior to that, it was 17. It's a good practice to try to keep that number below 10%. That number does include, which our water utility does back out lost water, which we do account for, fire hydrants, water testing and other things like that, that do make this number go lower. But essentially we're losing about 15 to 17% of water, which is pretty high. We are going to propose to enter into a contract with Astera for $23,000 to perform leak detection. Right now, the total leak detection adds up to about $340,000 in lost revenue. So if we can cut this by a third, we are definitely paying for the services that we are trying to get. This is a proprietary program. They do leak detection through, I think, the air, and they do some infrared testing in order to find these leak detections so that we can then repair them. So I'll turn it over to Charlie and Tom for any further questions or better insights than I have on how they detect the leaks in the city versus other competitors.
Good evening. As Carl mentioned, Astera uses proprietary information. They use satellite technology where they take an image from their satellite and they use that to look at the soil conditions that are subsurface area. Same technology that was used when they say, hey, there's water on Mars. This is the exact same technology. So they're looking at the different types of frequencies that's in the soil. So they can see that if there's an area that has a lot of water, they can look at the different frequencies of that water to determine if it's treated drinking water, if it's just groundwater, or if it's wastewater. So they've been very successful. I've talked to some other communities that have used them in Wisconsin, Green Bay being one of them. They're on their 6th year of using Astera, and they like it because they get a scan of the entire city every year, where before they would hire somebody to come around and do an acoustical survey of just a third of the city once a year. So they were always, behind. And so now they're getting a full scan of the entire city. That it's nice because the satellite technology will give us areas that we need to go out and investigate, rather than saying, hey, investigate the entire city. They just concentrate on certain areas where they're getting these hits. And so they have a workforce that'll come in then, give us they're estimating about 5 to 6 days on the ground, of boots on the ground, they call it, where then they'll come in and they'll look at those areas of high priority that they've identified. And then we can just focus on those areas and concentrate on finding the leaks in those areas.
Questions, Alderman Doherty?
I think it's a great idea. I'd like to have some kind of feedback loop though, to see how this works. I mean, definitely you gotta have something like this because it's so hard to find these, but I'd like to hear what happens, let's see what happens when they get the report back. You guys get through the boots on the ground part of it. I'd love to hear what we find.
We'll definitely bring that report back, and particularly, hopefully, if this works, even if it doesn't work well, however it works, we will bring back the data on what our lost water is in future years, so we can definitely measure it too.
The last thing I just wanted to add to that was we're getting a significant discount because Astera is working with the city of Milwaukee on doing this. And so we've also reached out to Brown Deer, Mequon, Cudahy, and Menominee Falls is also interested. So that's helping to drive down that price, because when they take a satellite image, I think it's, from a satellite, it's not from a small area, it's greater Milwaukee area is what they're looking at. And so they said, hey, we're doing this for Milwaukee, we can add you in, no problem. And so that's why you see such a significant savings.
Alderman Gelhard?
I think it's a good idea. I'm just curious, where we're getting the money to fund this.
Well, you are correct. We did not budget for this because it's not something we anticipated. When we looked at our lost water tables, when we had the PSC report, we noticed 15 to 70% lost water. So we're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in water that's not being billed because it's lost in the system. We figured that we would use the fund balance and some of the money in water and sewer to pay for this. And then we factored it into the rate plan that we're going to send to the PSC for future years for this work.
Basically, if lost $350,000 this year and we only lose $150,000 next year because we find all the leaks, it will have paid for itself.
That is the goal, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Alderman Schmelzing?
I had a similar question about the feedback loop. I'd be really interested to hear how this, what we find. And also I would assume there's some cost to plug these leaks. So, because we'll then have to identify what's really the biggest issues, and almost like, we have our water main break program. So having to make sure we address those as well when they're not just reported by someone. So I think it's a good thing to operationalize. If we're going to be seeing a loss in revenue.
I get a motion then to execute the agreement with the professional services agreement with Astera.
So moved.
Move by Alderman Doherty. Is there a second?
Second,
Second by Alderman Gelhard. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Carries. And next is an authorization to execute an agreement with ABT for utility billing, printing, and mailing, not to exceed $13,600.
Thank you, Mayor Kennedy. I'll just turn this one right over to Tom. He did most of the research on this. Essentially, this would begin for 2024. It's been factored into the budget for the cost for utility bill printing. It does say $13,000 on that. Probably 9 to 10,000 of that is the postage for it. So the printing is a really small portion of the actual price, but it is factored as a total contract.
We've been printing them in-house and then mailing them, and it just has a third party do it all for us, correct?
That is correct. They would become in secured envelopes now rather than a postcard is the main difference.
So it's not going to require nearly as much staff time. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Do you want anything to that? I think is the case here.
Yeah, basically, we had just gone out to 3 different companies that we have worked with in the past from other communities and gotten quotes from them to do that work. And ABT, we work with in a couple of other communities, and I can tell you that they are top notch. They do an excellent job in working with each community separately, and they do a really nice job in keeping their costs down. So that's why we recommended ABT.
But will our bills look the same as they do now?
Oh, it'll be on
So
a full
how are we
8
going to get the word out to residents to look for a different water bill?
So we'll have to put that out there, social media, our electronic newsletters, and then the winter newsletter as well when it comes out in people's mail to look for a envelope that comes in the mail that says, from City of Glendale and an actual 8.5.
Okay.
The last thing I just add to that also is what we've seen in other communities that have moved away from the postcard, because that really is a 70s, 80s style of sending out the utility bill. We can put a lot more communication in the bottom half of the bill as well. So in our some of our other utilities, they have QR codes on there so people can scan that to pay on their phone directly. There's information about what's going on in the city that we can put on there as well. So it just gives us a bigger platform, I think, to get a communication out to our customers as well.
I get it. Oh, yeah.
As much as I love going away from the postcard, I'd rather have no bill at all that I have to get in the mail. That might be something we should look into, because I've been here for almost 20 years. I've got auto pay set up with the same bank account for about 20 years. And the only time I look at it is to make sure that auto pay went through.
That is the only time I use mine too.
So
That's
it's
not
like,
a
do
lot.
I have any late fees? Cause like something happened. So I think from my perspective, this is a great step to get things more current. But I'd love to be able to have a box I check on there and say like, email me instead, fill in an email address. And then you could maybe remove me from that until, let's say, a bill isn't paid or something. Something to think of.
Have that option. It's just not very easy to sign up for right now. You have to call and speak to Tom, and he has to manually go into the system and achieve that. The goal is to set up a better online system for customers to be able to better interface with their water bill, to see their history, to see their usage. And then also to check a box that says, you know, basically send me an e-bill and don't send me a bill in the mail anymore. So I think in 2024, we're gonna hopefully work towards that. It is an option. We can give you Tom's number and he'd be happy to return your phone call.
Thank you. I had no idea that was possible. So I'll make sure I send that phone or make that phone.
All right, can I get a motion then to approve the, or execute the agreement with ABT? Moved by Alderman Bailey, is there a second? Second by Alderman Vukovic, any further discussion? All in favor of approving, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. We have two ordinances before us. The first one I think is a pretty quick one. This is the ordinance amending Title 15, Chapter 6, Regulation of Signs, Billboards, and Other Advertising Medium. And this is an area where Plan Commission didn't get changed to Planning and Architectural Review Commission. That's the only change on this one. Can we get a motion to adopt that ordinance, please? Moved by Alderwoman Shaw, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Doherty. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. The next one's lengthier, and Mr. Fellows has joined us up here now to explain a number of the changes regarding, I believe it's digital billboards and or Title 15, Chapter 6.
So real quick, the ordinance that was in your packet for tonight's meeting, it basically goes over a few things. We had the opportunity or the request to change the digital billboard section of the ordinance. But I want to address first a couple of items that are actually in that ordinance. Also, there was a couple clarification items that were in the ordinance, some grammatical things that we caught. In addition, we have had some issues with some of our larger complexes. For instance, Johnson Controls has a lot of wayfinding signage on their property. Our current ordinance actually doesn't really allow for that, although they've had that signage for years. I'm not sure how it got permitted in the first place, but we basically are suggesting, since we were amending the ordinance, to put in some campus type directional signages for properties larger. We did pick a number that should handle Cardinal Stretch, Nicolay. It should be able to handle the Barnabas Center, some larger properties like that, that as you're navigating through the property, it might be helpful to have directions on to go to right or left or straight for whatever happens to be on the property. So
Bay Shore fall under this as well?
Bay Shore has their own separate set of guidelines and everything that were adopted through the CDA, so they are pretty free and clear from the ordinance from that perspective. So that's how
Okay.
their wayfinding fits in. So that's sort of that section. With regard to the digital billboard section, the request was to expand the geographic region that we allow for billboards currently as adopted. Billboards are allowed to be south of Glendale Avenue, to the municipal border. Adjacent to and south of, yes. And to the municipal border within the corridor of I-43. The ordinance was drafted to allow for 5 structures. Each could have a maximum of 2 digital billboards, so that would be 10 digital billboards. The request has been made to add a new geographic area, which would be an area north of Lexington, west of Ironwood, and then south of a particular parcel, which is the just north of the Bavarian soccer fields, which is the We Energies facility. So there'd be a section of a few parcels that would be allowed to have billboards, basically one of the Bavarian soccer fields and or the Bavarian parking lot. The regulations as drafted before you that were sent to you last week keep the height at 60 feet and some of the other standards. That particular area, we did add that the distance between billboards was the area south and adjacent to Glendale is actually 500 feet. Up in this particular area, we made it, I believe, 2,000 feet, so that essentially there'd only be one billboard within that area to the west of I-43. I'm trying to think what other highlights.
Currently,
There
we
may be.
have 5 approved structures
Correct.
with 8 panels, correct? 2 of them only have one side panels.
We have 5 approved, and only one of them has 1 panel, so we have, actually 9 panels, and 5 structures. So there's sort of 1 digital billboard kind of, panel that's sort of not approved. So the new ordinance, and thank you, Mayor, that the new ordinance also, would change the number of structures to 6, but maintain, 10 digital message boards. And I don't know if I need to, you're all looking at me like I need a little bit more clarification. So let me try to explain this. So the idea would be currently, just as a refresher, the Planning Commission approved Sprecher for a digital message board in 1 structure, but they chose to only have a south-facing digital billboard. Therefore, they don't have one facing north. That's why there's sort of this extra digital billboard sort of that was not approved. What the thought would be is that one of the structures south of Glendale Avenue would, instead of having 2, would have 1. So south of Glendale Avenue, you would have 2 structures that would only have 1 digital billboard on it. The others ones would all have 2. And then in this area near the Bavarian, it would be a single structure with 2 faces facing north and south. That would get us to 6 structures with 10 digital billboards, if that helps clarify. And I will, before I move on, I'll let you ask any questions.
Any
I have
questions?
more, but. Okay,
I guess my question would be, so they would be building a brand new structure for a digital billboard on the grounds of the Bavarian Inn, is that it?
the discussions would be, it would actually be just north of the soccer field that's actually closest to Lexington. So the way the parcel lines are, there's a parking lot that's between the Bavarian Inn and the soccer field. Part of that parking lot is on the Bavarian Inn property, and part of that is actually on the soccer field property. So the thought would be that this digital billboard would be sort of right in the, generally speaking, the north east corner of the soccer field.
And who's putting this billboard structure in if it goes forward?
If it moves forward, the person that has sort of spearheaded it would be a direct outdoor.
But until we approve it, we can't accept any application. So right now there isn't one.
There is no application. And I guess I'll clarify this also. The way that ordinance is drafted is that particular area is actually B1. What we are suggesting staff, so that we actually have a little bit more leverage, and it's actually city council would have a review of it, that only digital display boards up in that area near Lexington and Ironwood would have to be in a planned development district. So some portion of that property would have to be rezoned to a planned development rather than B1. If you recall, our concern in the past was limiting digital display boards just to the M1, because the M1 is actually just the industrial area next to 43. And the concern was expanding it farther north into the B1. Basically, the B1 extends all the way from Hampton all the way up to the, as far as you get to the farther north end of the city. And so we're trying to kind of try to keep it out of the B1. That will minimize any future request.
I'm not in favor of putting a new digital billboard. I mean, we've got enough already, quite frankly, in my opinion. I don't think we get very much out of these things. I mean, it was like a one-time payment, and, it's not like we're, co-opting on the profits this, person or this entity has. So anyway.
Yeah, what would be on the sign? I mean, just another advertisement of things.
It would be very similar to all the other ones that have been approved. It would be commercial advertising, off-premise advertising, based on conversations and what has been approved on other signs. There have been, each of the companies have indicated that they would be glad to do emergency alerts and work with Welcome to Glendale and the North Shore Chamber and the city for special events. So basically some public announcements and those types of things. I'm sure they would do, other, I think they work with sometimes the DOT to do like When there's like motorcycle awareness and, you know, bike to work, they'll put those kind of messages out there. Also kind of public services that are at a kind of a higher level, but that's essentially, it's off-premise advertising with some public.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman.
Things. Don't know why. Coming over here. This is the same, pretty much the same amount of billboards that or structures that we had before. We're just making them two-phase. I understand that. And I don't have an issue with it. And most of the people that I talk with in my district don't have an issue with it. So I'm not really concerned about that part. What I'm concerned about is I personally am not prepared to vote on this because it changed since the Friday to the one that I've seen to now. I will not be voting for this to vote for this because I haven't seen it. I have some questions about the language that is in here and why certain language is in here. Like 4,000 to the east, 4,000, that makes no sense. Why don't you say the border of Glendale?
I haven't,
Because
I'd like to address those comments.
just let me finish. So I seen these, I mean, and I see where this is. I just want this clear, and this is not for, and the thing is, this ordinance is not for one particular person or one particular entity. I don't necessarily want us to structure something on one entity or not. I just want it to be fair for everybody within the structures and limitations that we've put it on in our my district, because it only affects my district. And make sure that we have everything crossed and dotted. That's the only thing that I am saying no wrong. If that's, I just have questions and I don't have enough time to look at this one and the one that we had between our packet meeting.
Yes, so moving on from what was actually in your packet from Friday, there was two items. One was something that Carl and I discussed over the weekend and this morning, was that there were some paragraphs in the original ordinance, and it actually ended up in the packet from Friday, was the original ordinance, when drafted probably 20 years ago, referenced planner. And Carl and I have been discussing that as we rewrite ordinances, we'd like to try to keep them as either department head or manager level. So with the draft that you got on Friday, there was some sections that actually did reference community development director or designee. There was about 8 items that said planner. They're in paragraphs. I think one of them was a new paragraph. I think the other 7 were paragraphs we didn't really modify. But before you is actually a red line copy document that basically indicates the change from planner to community development director. So it's kind of a simple change there just to make it more consistent. And then as we bring more ordinances forward over time, we'll try to, clean up the ordinance from that perspective. And then about midday today, we got some comments. There were 5 comments from Direct Outdoor. I prepared a quick little memo for you. They had a number of suggestions. So in that packet, the last few pages are actually the correspondence that they gave us with the different items, as well as some marked up copies of the draft that was requested from them a few weeks ago. And then I did do a red line version, which is the bulk of that staple document, which I didn't do in color, I apologize. But if you go through it, you'll see highlights. They're kind of a gray highlight. So I highlighted those areas that were of question. I'll go through them really quickly and try to address those concerns. So the first item had to do with section 15.610.07B 3B. And the concern was that
What page is that on?
that's going to be on the red line version. It is 31 of 45. And I did, in the memo, I actually gave you the text that you received on Friday and text that that staff is suggesting, as well as sort of a description. So you're on bottom of page 31 of 45. And that language at the very last sentence said the sign shall be located on a parcel not less than 4 acres. The theory or the thought process there was that the discussion of where this would be located is on a very large parcel over 10 acres. And the thought would be to keep it on larger parcels rather than smaller parcels. In discussions, that seemed fine. The discussions today, around noon, the discussion was that there was a possibility of purchasing some DOT right of way, and the idea would be that there wouldn't be land being merged, and so it would end up with a very small parcel. With regard to that particular sentence, staff doesn't have a problem deleting that particular sentence. It doesn't really change the intent of the ordinance. It would allow for the division of land to be much smaller or as small as possible. The thought there originally was that it would, stay on larger parcels, but staff doesn't have a problem with that. And so in the memo, you'll see that staff is fine recommending the deletion of that particular sentence. Then moving on through the paragraph, through the memo, the other suggestion, which happened to be in the, we'll go to, it is on page 32 of 45. It's some subsection G2. And that language states that it has or within 4,000 feet of another digital billboard on the east side of Interstate 43 or I-43. Basically, further up in the ordinance, it discusses that described boundary of Lexington Ironwood south of a certain tax key number, and then so many feet to the west. This reference really, I guess it's just additional clarification that billboards would not be on the east side of I-43. But with the other language within the document and the ordinance, it could be considered just additional language that's not necessary. The 4,000 feet was a measured distance. It was not a random distance, but that was basically a measurement that basically went from about the railroad track and then to a certain distance sort of north on 43. So with regard to that section, staff doesn't feel like the intent of the ordinance is modified one way or the other, so we're perfectly fine having that deleted. Then with the next section, that would be section 07H. That is on page 32 of 45 of the red line copy at the very bottom. This particular section, I'm just going to state that our directive originally from council and that direction was to have the billboards, the height generally of the of Sprecker's on-premise sign and the Bavarian's on-premise sign, which are both 60-foot signs. So we kept the billboards at 60 feet. And with this draft and the indication from the communication this afternoon, and I will mention this has been communicated probably multiple times over the last month to staff, and staff has responded that this is really a policy decision of council. We did recommend in the ordinance that you received on Friday to allow an additional 5 feet above 60 feet for architectural appurtenances. But I really do feel like this is a policy decision that you as council have to decide. If you want billboards an extra 10 feet, then you've already permitted. The argument in this particular case is that near the intersection of Lexington and Ironwood, the freeway is at its highest point, and that the proposal in this particular instance is if a freeway is greater than 35 feet, that the billboard operator would be allowed to go to 70 feet. I have provided some additional language within this memo that you may want to consider today or at a future date. It's a little bit different than what the outdoor media suggested, just in formatting and for clarification, but it does leave 60 feet to the south of Glendale Avenue. It could possibly allow for that additional 70 feet. And it basically just breaks that paragraph out into 5 sections. So that's sort of a summary of that response. And then the fourth item is 07N4. That's on page 34 of 45. It's kind of towards the top of the page highlighted. It's section 4. The concern was that that was repetitive and overly broad. Staff reviewed it. It's very similar to the paragraph up above with regard to landscaping in item number 3. I don't think either way, one way or the other, whether it's there or not, it still sort of has the intent. So we're perfectly fine having that paragraph deleted. And then if we move on to 07P, this particular paragraph is with regard to maintenance. It's at the bottom of page 34 of 45. This paragraph, just to note, has not been proposed to be changed from how it's currently drafted, except we're changing it currently as an O. We're changing it to a P just for numbering because an extra paragraph was added at some point in this draft. But the request has been suggested that language be added that says after written notice is given by the 60 days prior. So with this recommendation, Carl and I have talked, we think that with regard to this paragraph, we should talk to Nathan about it. Our general first impression is if for some reason staff were to in 10 years send out a notice and it ended up in the mail truck for an extra day and it got date stamped on the 59th day and not the 60th day, then it would put the onus more on the municipality. Then one might argue the report doesn't have to be done. And then if something were to happen to that billboard, a portion fall off or something in that maintenance report not be prepared by the owner, then, and we've missed some postage date, then somebody who may or may not have an issue come back at the city also. So I guess we are not comfortable tonight addressing that recommendation from Outdoor Media, but we would recommend that that paragraph at least be held over for Nathan to review it since it's not something that was with the original draft.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. I just have 2 comments. First, I guess I have a question first. Do we know what is the height of the Bavarian sign that is currently there?
60 feet.
It is 60 feet. Okay.
And Sprecher's is 60 feet. I mean, that's what they were permitted for. I've measured them through a tool where you can measure the heights of buildings. They both come out to be about 60 feet. With that tool, there's probably an error of about a foot, but with installation, there could be an error of a foot or something, but I'm going to guess they're pretty darn close to 60 feet if you were to have a surveyor to measure them with a tripod and all that.
And the highest part of the freeway is actually at the north end of that property, not at the south end of that property. So if this is going to be built on the more toward the southern end of the property by the soccer fields, then 60 feet would be.
It's probably about I would say you're within a few feet of the highest point of the freeway at that point, where the
Okay.
sign, the proposed possible sign that hasn't been applied for.
Driving it
might
all
be.
the time, you're heading up as you're going towards Silver Spring. And
Mhm.
so I would
The
assume. that
crest is about, the crest is about, you're right above Silver Spring is probably the highest point, and
Okay.
you're just approaching the Bavarian sign at that point.
Okay, well, I guess I'm comfortable with the 60 plus the 5 feet additional that is in here. So I don't. And then the other thing is I don't feel like it's the city's responsibility though to send out a notice 10 years from now to inspect a property. I think that, that should be that should just be a standard, right? We don't send out notices of inspection on other things, right? Businesses regularly have to have inspections and they know the timeframes and time schedules for those. So, and 10 years from now, who knows what software we might use for permits, what staff might be here. So
The technology of digital billboards may be completely different in 10 years.
right. Those are my only questions or thoughts. I see a number of hands here. I'm going to call on Alderwoman Shaw first because she hasn't spoken yet. Alderwoman Shaw, go ahead.
Speaking of digital signs or electronic signs, I'm just curious because I'm going from discussions of years past. When we're talking signs, are we talking LED multicolor signs or monochrome colored signs?
These would be LED. They're colorful signs. I'm going to guess these panels, from my knowledge of the technology, probably has millions to billions of different color combinations. I mean, if you were to look at the ones that are in Milwaukee or the one that's currently erected in Glendale, I mean, it's as clear and vivid in color as you're going to get on the best TV that you're going to get in your house. So I think they can pretty well show all sorts of things. I mean, some of the images you put on these digital billboards are very similar to old technology that is, hung like wallpaper, because that's sort of the imaging the marketing of it is. But there are others that actually have very graphic photographs and things like that on them that depict,
I do know the
product.
Bavarian sign, since I've been on council, is the newest sign, because that was done about 2014-15 timeframe. And I know also Nicolay had a new sign put up during my tenure here, and theirs is monochrome. And I know, again, discussion was making sure there's not too much flashiness for motorists. All of a sudden, they're watching the sign as opposed to concentrating on the road.
So just for clarification, there's a couple different types of signs out there. So you have digital display boards that are going to be an LED. They're very large panel, multicolor type imaging, very similar to what you might find on a modern TV that you could get at your house. The Bavarian and the electronic image sign at Nicolay, at Walgreens, those are a different kind of technology. So they are actually more, I would consider, message boards that basically provide messages. They can scroll, they can flash. Some of them, if they're a little bit more advanced, they're going to have little diodes, and they can actually do pictures. They can actually also sometimes, if it's newer technology, actually do moving pictures. But the clarity of them is more abstract, or I don't want to say cartoon, but it's more abstract than like visual clarity. So the digital billboards are completely, I would say, completely different type of technology than what you see as the message boards around town that, or even there's the newest digital billboard or digital message board that I can think of is at Stratec on Good Hope Road. And theirs has a message board, but that is different technology. And with regard to the digital billboards, I forgot now, but there is a number of so many seconds that it can change. So they're gonna change, but it's not yeah, so it's not a rapid flashing type thing. It's gonna be message, and then you probably count it off, and there'll be another message. And that's pretty standard within the business, because they actually want the message up there for a certain period of time so you can actually see it. They are counting on the number of people to see that advertising, and they may actually extend them longer if it's a particular advertiser. I'm sure there's different contracts for different product.
Alderman,
Last comment is, I wish we would put an ordinance through like Hawaii has, because there are no billboards in Hawaii, because you need to see the landscape and see what the land where you are, see what's going on there, and not looking at signs to bypass everything that belongs to this wonderful city.
Mosley?
So I guess this is the first time I'm recognizing that we're looking at doing something in this location. I kind of find it ironic that our partnership with Bayshore, they wanted to put up a message sign like this, or I should say a billboard type sign, and we declined it because we didn't want that, I guess, the sign there. I don't know how else to put it. And also just looking at this, I'm trying to think, we've done this further south because that was always more industrial area right along the highway. When you're heading north here, we're gonna have one right by the burger shop. I forgot the name of it. Solly's. We're gonna have one right by Solly's, which is like right at the edge of the industrial moving into residential. And then north of there, we have, Lincoln Park, residential. And I remember I approved back in the day, the one for the Bavarian, because that's kind of a landmark location. So I guess from my perspective, I don't see why we would want to put something like that there. I think it's great that we're reaching out to industry and business, and thank you for that. I know there's a lot of work went in this, but I'm having a hard time just putting my head together on why this is a good location for the city. Yeah, but I think all the rules in place, if there were going to be a sign there, that's what we would need to have. So I'm not opposed of the ordinance change, more just when we might have to do something next with it. Thank you.
Oh, if I remember the Bay Shore discussion, one of the main problems was all the residential at Bay Shore and the bright lights of the residential. We've been very careful not to allow these signs anywhere near any Glendale residences. So the Bay Shore one was ruled out largely just because bright lights right by all of the residences being built there. Alderwoman Vukovic. Microphone.
None of these signs are remotely by residents, or else I wouldn't have even suggested that they even be over there. The Bavarian one is the only houses that are right by there are on the other side of Bavarian and in a cul-de-sac. So and then the same thing with the Sprecher sign, which is only going to be one-sided. So it does not face the residents of it. So with that, I did my due diligence in figuring out that. I do have a couple of other questions in regards to, I think we, as we do all these ordinance, I know we have a whole bunch of ordinance work to do, and just cleaning stuff up and changing, the titles and different things. But I really want, if the things that we change could be consistent, like throughout each ordinance. And I have a question about the permit time, and which was the signage expiration, renewal, extension. It was 120 days. I see you put it for 6 months, but doesn't our permits usually last a year or two? I mean, I just am trying to be, and especially in the supply chain problems that we have now, and we only have one renewal on here, that we've limited it to one renewal. If I'm reading this wrong, then please excuse me.
Sure, I'm. be glad
It's
to
page
answer that.
11. I'm just on page 11, of
Sure.
45.
So page 11, the current sign expiration or renewal or extension, it does state that the renewal of a permit within 120 days, staff did change it to say that shall be defined below in section C. Section C, only one renewal extension of 6 months shall be permitted. Expiration of a permit will be required, a new application fee or removal. So that addresses the 6 months. An extension, I guess you could,
But I believe, John, in section A, it says that
section A, yeah, I
will-
changed section A to say beginning within a 6-month period, completed within 12 months. So basically, if you have a permit, you need to start something in 6 months and then complete within 12 months.
Is that normal for any
Normal,
project that we have?
normal signs are probably up within 3 to 5 days after they get their permit, because they usually want to open up their business and they have a grand ribbon cutting and all that. So most signs other than digital billboards, they are usually ordered, waiting to be installed, and they go up pretty quickly. They're, something really large, probably someone might not want to pay that money up front until they have their permit in hand. It may take a couple weeks, but they're pretty much normal signs are usually made out of standardized parts. Digital billboards, obviously, they're superstructures and they have massive footings, so they are a little bit different. That's why when the 120 days was brought up, we suggested 6 months and 12 months. If you'd like it to be longer, we can certainly extend it that way. Based on my understanding is they can usually get up and completed within a year. So
I'm just looking at I'm trying to get us to not have so much paperwork. I mean, is it a big deal if we extend it? It's not gonna hurt the city. It's not gonna hurt anybody, but with the supply chain the way it is now, with different things that are happening, I don't wanna put limitations on stuff when we won't have to worry about it if we word it correctly, and this is going into an ordinance. but then we'll have to come back and do this over and over again or change it. Sometimes I think we make things too narrow when it wouldn't even matter if we made it a little bit longer, but it would help the flow of things going on. City staff wouldn't have to take their time to do another permit, or somebody will have to pay for another permit. I guess that's just this.
I guess when it was drafted, we were at 3 months and we extended it to 12 months. We thought that was
I'm gonna ask
almost
you-
double. If you'd want to make it 2 years or 18 months, staff really doesn't, that's really a policy decision. If you want it, whatever number you'd like, we'll be glad.
I guess it's not about this particular thing. I just want to be consistent throughout, not, and I think that's what our problem is. Sometimes we do things for a narrow reason for this particular thing, but I want it to all be like universal, so it's not an issue when we say, wait, what is permits? Usually permits are a year to 2 year, or whatever it was. I think it's a year and then it's 2 years to
Well,
have to
building-
get a renewal. I'm talking about in general.
So there is, I guess I wouldn't say. So, a building permit is 18 months, but that's regulated under different ordinances and also through the building code. You have, for instance, with the sign code, for some reason, for years, we had it as 120. I can't tell you where the 120 came from. I think this is the first time we've actually ever once we amended the billboards, I think it's the first time we've actually come across kind of a roadblock of timing. If we look at people with like liquor license and things like that, those are on a yearly cycle, so those are 12 months. So different things kind of have different amounts, but I mean, we could do 18 or 24 on this particular instance if
think,
that would be.
When we're doing permits, then for building, that's different. We know that we have some things to do. If it's a liquor license, that is like a given. I mean, never mind, I'm really don't feel well, so I'm getting
Let me ask you a question. It started within 6 months and completed within 12.
And there's an extension
So,
on
no,
top of
let
that.
me ask my question.
Mhm.
Are there inspections that have to take place during the process of the construction, or is there one inspection at the end when it's done? Because my question is, do we need these 6 months, or can we just say must be completed within 12 months?
You don't necessarily need the 6 months. I guess the thought process was with the 6 months is because there's only 5. What I've heard back from various people in the profession of digital billboards is the concern of people holding and not building, and holding up opportunities for others and things like that. So that's why we put the 6 months in there from that feedback. But if you wanted to delete those 6 months and just say must be completed within 12 months, that's fine too. I mean, to be honest, at the 6 months, if we knew there was some dirt being moved, that would be started. So, I mean, it doesn't, I don't.
My
think-
question is,
so.
would we be going out to inspect anyway, or would we not be going out to inspect?
So the inspection, sign inspections aren't covered under our current agreement with Safe Build. And so this ordinance was drafted so that the structural inspection is a third party to be verified by the sign owner. So they would just basically provide us with a piece of paper that says a third party engineer or some other person with qualifications to make sure that the structure has been put up in a solid way would just be provided. Very similar to parking decks aren't inspected by building inspectors. They're actually signed off by their structural engineer. So
There are inspections throughout the time, mainly the structural part in the beginning.
Because I'm wondering if we have this 6 months to 12 months, what's the tracking mechanism for city staff to actually track the 6 months? Have they started yet or not? Is that one more hurdle, or would we want to just basically say 12 months, meaning that by the end of the 12-month period, it has to be closed out?
an extra hurdle that could be eliminated if you'd like. It was just providing additional
Yeah, I guess I don't,
response.
if you go and pull a permit for anything you're doing on your house, right, you have 18 months before you have to have it inspected. You can do the work anytime in there. You could wait until 17 months and 3 weeks and then do the work the last week and then get it closed out.
And if you're making progress, I mean, I can tell you there's a number of businesses in Glendale that particularly through the pandemic that they extended or they've had to be extended, and
Sure.
the building inspector, they did basically will work it out and give an extension, and if the contractor says I need 2 weeks or 3 months, he'll extend it that period of time. So, I mean, that's an option in there too.
My thought is that we don't necessarily need a start date, we just need an end date.
That's fine.
That's my feeling. So any other comments from folks here? We have an ordinance before us that if I were to ask for a motion, I would ask that the 6-month part be struck.
I would ask that the section 13.7 GE be limited to 5 structures and not 6.
Microphone.
But I would like to explain that there's still 5 like spaces like we originally had, but the one thing is there'll be structures back to back to have 2 phase. So it's not extending any one particular one. It's just, it's gonna be a double faced one, but it's still one structure in the same, well, it's 2 because one is built already or it's gonna be built separately. That's why it has to be a second structure, but it's not going to change anything from what we originally said previously.
It sounds like they're talking about building a brand new one on the Bavarian Inn soccer field, if I understood
But it's,
Mr. Fellows.
it will be,
It will replace one of the ones from the
Right.
southern part that won't be.
yes,
It will be a
There's
6
still-
structure, but you'll still have 10 digital billboards.
right. Still the 2 billboards each, but one, it'll have to have an extra structure, so it's still within that same spacing.
Well, let me just explain where I'm coming from. When you drive down to O'Hare Airport, you see all those billboards. I think that looks terrible, and I don't want Glendale to turn into another billboard avenue or alley when you're driving up I-43 and you're seeing all these. It looks terrible, okay? And I just don't want Glendale to turn into that. And that's why I don't like the idea of increasing the number of structures and the billboards that people are going to be seeing as they travel up 43.
So to give a little background, one of the reasons that the Bavarian site was recommended is because we've now approved a bunch of signs down in the southern part of the city, but there are actually 2 additional signs that are in Milwaukee properties that are right there as well. So it actually crowds in and has 7 signs essentially on the same area. And so the idea was to take one of them from down there and not have it built down there and instead have it built up at the Bavarian property. So,
My concerns are still.
yeah, I get it. Well, because that whole southern area now, once they're all built, there could be 7 signs all right there clustered around the Home Depot to Sprecher area. So, yeah.
One option that's a deciding vote, I guess, is you could keep it at 5 with 10, and you could still allow for the geographic area at the Bavarian to be in the ordinance, and then there's flexibility of 2 different geographic locations, but
But that one also up, one already had. There's a structure that's already there with 1. And it will, if we do it to 10, it's not, it doesn't add up to what we need, because Sprecher is only doing one side. Then there needs to be, because we're moving one structure from the south to the north, they want to put the second part of that up. It's just, I don't think it makes a difference personally, but I mean, and I live there, so I mean, it's not gonna be any different. It's one way or the other. It's just the second sign on the opposite side of that structure.
Alderman Schmelzing?
I was just going to ask, has anyone stood on the parking structure at Bay Shore and looked towards the Bavarian and see if this might be an issue? Because that was one of the concerns earlier, and it wouldn't be right in front of them. But there is still residential with direct line of sight, at least what I can tell on Google Maps. So I'm echoing what Alderman Gerald saying. I think it's one thing to have it in a more industrial area where there's already a clustering of signs. When you start stretching it out north of the park and yeah, just anyways, there's my opinion. I
There's
guess
like a
that's-
quarter mile to a half a mile between the Bavarian where the residential is to where they're going to put the Bavarian
Saying
sign.
the Bavarian, the Bay Shore Apartments.
Right.
If you're in the top
It's
of the Bay Shore
across
Apartments.
all the way down Silver Spring. I mean, if you, it's, their apartments is pushed back from Silver Spring. So it's say a few hundred feet.
I haven't had a chance to go stand on the roof and look myself, and it's not my district, but just highlighting that for anybody,
I'm just, and I'm,
right?
as this is my district,
Right.
that's a long distance.
Okay.
It wouldn't even.
Yep.
I don't really.
All right, can we get, I guess I'll just ask, can we get a motion to adopt the ordinance, but striking on page 11 of 45, in 3A, striking the fourth line, begun within 6 months and, so that it would read, shall expire by limitations, become null and void if the work authorized by such permit is not completed within 12 months from the date of such permit. That's the correction I wanted to add. Would anybody else have one? While we're at it, so we get a motion that approves all these already, so.
Well, if we can do it like John Fellows said and limit it to 5 structures, I guess I'd be willing to make that modification.
All right. It does, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
What page is that on?
32 of 4.
Yeah, so the issue is that when we originally agreed to have 5 signs, we agreed to have 5 signs with 2 sides. Right, that they would all have north-south facing sides. So there'd be 5 structures built and there would be 10 panels. Because at least one of the signs and probably a second sign are only gonna have one single facing panel. If we don't allow for a 6th structure, then we can never actually get to the 10 panels that are permitted by this current ordinance. That's the problem with the limiting it to 5. Because if you have 1 or 2 of the 5 that only have one side, then you have 5 structures with 8 panels or 9 panels as opposed to the full 10 that are permitted by the city ordinance.
Thought process would be that one of the signs south of Glendale Avenue, which was approved for 2 panels, could become a 1-panel sign, allowing 2 panels to be installed at the Bavarian. That's the theory behind the text. Or someone could install just a 1-panel sign, I guess, at the Bavarian if they chose.
Oh, because we'd be limiting it to the 6 and that would be it, so. All right, so I'm gonna ask for a motion that includes the one change that I propose, right? The ordinance as it was presented, but except on page 11 of 45, item 3A, 4th line, striking the words begun within 6 months and. Can I get a motion to that effect?
I just had a quick question. Right, because I wanted to ask, just for the record, does that also include the edits that were described by Mr. Fellows in the accompanying memo?
From today,
These were not incorporated into, what you have in the memo is not incorporated into the 45-page.
so what's in the memo is incorporated into the red line version that's attached, but it is not actually in the ordinance. That I did not give you a new ordinance today.
Right, but
no,
you
wait.
gave us the red line.
The red line, I didn't give you an ordinance, correct?
Okay, but the ordinance redlined here, which is 45 pages, includes all the changes that you have in your draft memo in the front part.
It includes the items that are in the red line are highlighted in the red line. The red line does not include new text. The memo actually gives you the text from Friday, and it gives you proposed text going forward. So it's actually in the memo. So for instance, on that front page of the memo for that first item dealing with the 4 acres, it's in the language is actually in the memo. It says from and to. The from is the existing, the to is propose, which deletes the words, the sign shall be located on a parcel less than 4 acres.
Is any of anyone's permits being, getting ready to expire? Cause I think if we just get the wording, you figure out and we can just address this and approve it at the next council meeting. So it's all in one
Yeah,
swoop. And then you just have to, fix the stuff though, so it's all there, because I think we're gonna have one issue where the red line wasn't published.
right.
Second, your memos, which you have corrected and addressed some of my issue, is a memo, but it wasn't published as well.
Yeah,
I think it would be staff's preference to hold this over to the next meeting. Let us
Yeah.
give you guys a clean copy and a clean, quote unquote, clean red line version, not a red line of a red line.
right.
But we can make sure that what's being presented is presented to the public and to you guys, and we're not confusing on what text is.
I get a
accepted,
motion
not.
then to postpone the vote on this until our next meeting.
So moved.
On Bailey, first and seconds. All right. All those in favor of postponing the vote on this to our next meeting so that the red lines can be properly noticed and also then presented to us in a more integrated format, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries is postponed to our next meeting. One last item of business before we get into a presentation on the budget. We typically cancel our second meeting in December because it usually falls right around the Christmas time. This year, it actually falls exactly on Christmas. So can we get a motion to cancel our December 25th meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Shaw,
Second.
seconded by Gelhard. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And if something comes up, we can always call a special meeting. We had to call one once about a library agreement in December, so. All right. Turn it over now to city administrator, who's going to go through the 2024 draft budget presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Kennedy. Thank you, Common Council, for allowing staff the opportunity to present the 2024 draft budget tonight.
Oh, actually, I do have a question. The
Yeah.
agenda does not list committee, staff, board reports like it normally does when we finish the presentations. And I was actually thinking we should probably do those before we go into a lengthy presentation.
So Attorney Bear, it's just a item of conversation that, yes, I think when I deleted the closed session, when I was reformatting, I accidentally hit one more line of deletion, so we can certainly make our reports, correct?
Yeah, I don't see any issue. I just thought they were eliminated on purpose because
No, it's just quick reports. Then we'll do our reports real quick. Clerk? Chief?
This will be quick. If you remember last year, we had a couple officers that were here to get an award for saving someone in the river. They have been awarded the Carnegie Hero Award. It's done through, I think 16 people throughout the United States got that award. So they're actually doing a little interview with the media. They have special medals made, and it probably won't be for another month, and we'll do some press releases then, but just wanted to give them a kudos that they were able to receive that award.
Okay, thank you. City administrator?
No report tonight.
City attorney?
just want to let everybody know that I've been working with the clerk and we're monitoring some ongoing issues related to upcoming elections, and the WEC has issued some advisement and direction on the printing of envelopes for absentee ballots that involves what constitutes an address and whether or not it will have state and zip code on it. And there's been some discussion about that, and there's also some litigation in that regard. So there's going to be, I anticipate, some court rulings and additional filings in both state and federal court as we move through the process on that. And I participated in a meeting with municipal attorneys from also all around the county last Wednesday to discuss that. And you'll more on that as we move closer to the election cycle. But I just wanted to put that on people's radar in case you get calls from the public or from the media inquiring about it. Feel free to call me and I'll give you a full briefing on that. But just wanted to put that on your radar.
There's a joke about Wisconsin weather that if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change. I think we can actually take that same thing and extrapolate it to elections. If you don't like how elections are conducted, wait 5 minutes and the state will change it on you. So, yeah. Yeah. Number 6,
No report.
number 5,
No report, though just as a point of order, I saw on the agenda, there was not in the agenda section, but down below about adoption of single and multi capital budget for large apparatus. Is that something we were planning to talk about, or did I miss it?
so it was included in our packets, but failed to be an agenda item. So Carl did speak with the chief. It'll be on our next agenda.
Okay, that's great.
Yep.
Got lost in all the other stuff on there, so I apologize.
Number
I didn't
4,
want to bring up my report.
number 3,
Nothing this evening.
number 2,
Nothing tonight.
number 1. All right, I got 2 quick things. First, the fire department board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning has been canceled. There's no significant items for the agenda for this month, which means I'm free to go to the North Shore Chambers Morning Mingle, which Joanne will be hosting at St. Christopher's Church in River Hills. So you're all welcome to come to that too tomorrow if you want, 7:30 a.m. And the ICC meeting was held today, and there was a presentation done about MMSD's conveyance system. If you want to see a map of what all the sewers look like and how many miles there are, which is over 300, I'll pass that around. And there was also a presentation done today about the 794 Lake Interchange, which there's a proposal right now that once you come across the Hone Bridge, you'd come down to grade level and there would no longer be the elevated 794. So there's some different possibilities that DOT is studying. So I'll pass these around if anybody wants to look at them. So I'll start them this way first. And that is my report. All right, now we'll turn it over to the city administrator for the budget presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Kennedy. So we are here to review the draft budget for 2024, which begins January 1st. The budget is obviously every year an extreme effort with a combination of staff working together and working with our intergovernmental partners to compile this budget for the city council and the members of the community to look at. It has been posted on the city's website, so it is public for everybody. And I just want to thank, while we have Charlie and Jolynn here, John Fellow stepped out. And Jessica is out of the office today. So just thanks to all the staff members, particularly ones here that helped put this together. So I'll go through this. Don't feel bad about interrupting me if you have any questions, anything, or if I fail to cover an important topic that you want, please stop me too.
Quick question. The version that we're going through, is it the one that was, I saw a Glendale notice that was sent out today, or is it the one that we got, I think it was earlier?
It's the same document.
Same document,
Yep,
okay.
that one was just the one published for it's the exact same one. It was just published today for the residents.
And you don't need to you don't have to raise your hands for me to call on you to be recognized while he goes through his presentation. Just feel free to just direct I know we can do this in an orderly fashion, so I don't need to be the referee. Thank you.
So we'll start off like we do every year. We'll talk about the city's biggest revenue source, which is property taxes. So this covers all of our revenue for the city. It funds over 51% of the city's entire revenue. The majority of property taxes funds general fund expenses. It actually funds about 68% of it. Our recycling costs 90,000, retiree health insurance, it funds 100% of that at 500,000. And then the last and most important one, which funds our capital improvement program, is $3.1 million for debt services. We'll get into that more in greater detail. As you'll notice here, the debt service number does increase from last year. There's an exemption to allow for that. Our plan early January is to come to you guys with a 5 to 10 year plan on what our debt will look like in the future, what we can borrow for on an annual basis for our regular programs, and also trying to fit a new revised police department in there. So that's sort of a thing that we will talk about later and then at a next meeting. So the 2024 property tax levy, we're allowed to increase the levy like we talked about for additional debt services, which it went up $306,000 for that. We did increase we're allowed to increase it for the North Shore Fire Department expenses per the resolution that was adopted tonight. And then also the net new construction number this year, it was down a little bit from last year, still at 0.31%. Last year was 0.37%. So pretty close. So this is just a diagram highlighting where the property tax dollars go. As you can see, the majority of it is allocated towards the general fund, small for the general special funds, and then the debt is the top orange one of $3.1 million, a slight increase from the previous year. And I will say The majority of that is the additional borrowing that was required from the I-43 project and for the police station that's to the south of us. So those were two big projects in one year that is impacting the city's debt obligations. As we talked about, we're limited to increase our property tax levy to pay for additional costs that we see on an annual basis to what the CIP is. The number that goes across the bottom, the yellow or orange line is the CIP. Is the levy limit number for a specific year. The blue number is the CPI in a specific year. So as you can see, we are being out inflated by inflation for what we can levy for on our tax limit. Particularly 2023 was a rough year, and 2022 is not much better. Needs to be more like 2019 in this to help keep up. So this is our property tax rate of assessed value versus other North Shore communities, and we happen to be right in the middle of the seven. So we have three higher and three lower than us. We're about $7.03 per $1,000 of assessed value for our property tax rate.
That $7.03 is lower than a decade ago.
I believe so, yes.
It's down from, it was $7.67 is the highest we've had. Part of that was closing a TIF a few years ago, and we've been able to keep it down since then.
Yeah, we've been very successful in that. As well as when residents ask where property taxes go, this dollar on here sort of implicates where your tax dollars go. Only 27 cents for every dollar spent on property taxes comes back to the city of Glendale. As you can imagine, most of that 42% goes to the two school districts here in Glendale. The remaining part goes to the county, MMSD, and then the technical college, MATC. So we are very fortunate here in Glendale to have a large non-residential tax base that pays, right, according to this, 48% of our property taxes. So we rely on residents to pay 52%. That helps keep property tax dollars low for everybody. So it's a fortunate thing. In 2025, personal property tax will disappear from the tax rolls, so we will no longer see it. The state will be supplementing that income in future years after 2024.
That number has been going up and one of the reasons why it was so important that we started the chamber a few years ago is half of our taxes are being paid by businesses, and they needed some sort of a structure to bring the business community together. So
that's the slides on property taxes. Next thing I want to talk about is state and local control. So, and this budget and budgets across Wisconsin, we are obligated to follow state laws regarding expenditure restraints, and we have our own local controls here as well. There is a voluntary expenditure restraint program that we do assume applying for and getting the money in 23 and 24, which is basically a program that means we can't increase our spending budget to budget from basically 23 to 24 by more than CPI, which is 5.4% and 60% of new construction. We obviously won't come close to those numbers with CPI being really high. We will not come close to meeting our expenditure restraint number. The actual revenue received from this is pretty good amount. It was $244,000 in 2023. Unfortunately, it will decrease in 2024. We did receive a list from the state that sort of explains that there's a $58 million pot of money for expenditure restraint. And there's a whole lot of more communities that are adhering to this because the inflation number is so high. Two big communities each got about $1 million in additional expenditure restraint. So that really takes off the top of the $58 million that's out there for everybody else. So fortunately, we still qualify. Unfortunately, the year we get more money from the state for shared revenue, we lose money in expenditure restraint. So it's not always fair. Then internally, we have our own fund balance policy. Basically, we want to have a 25% ending fund balance for the general fund and use less than 5% in a specific year. Our 2024 budget, we fortunately have a very low deficit projected of about $268,000. So we use 1.9, excuse me, that was the 2023 deficit. We use 1.9% of the fund balance. I don't have the 24 deficit listed here. But we do project a $268,000 deficit in 2023, which would use about 4.6% of the fund balance. We were able to cut the projected deficit nearly in half from what we projected in the 2023 budget. So that's a mark to all the department heads who do keep a close eye on expenditures.
Even at that, our fund balance is at 38% at the end of the year. So we were probably over 40%.
That is correct.
Okay.
And again, that fund balance policy was adopted in 2018, and it is a self-imposed regulation by the city, not a state policy. So this here the slide here sort of exemplifies the state shared revenue. The last column assumes the full new state shared revenue in the 2024 budget per the state's spreadsheet on that. So that's listed in the far column, and I apologize, I can't see it on here with my
Actually,
shared screen.
doesn't it kick in halfway through the year?
So I thought that too. I looked at the state's revenue for the 2024 estimates for this revenue, and it had us with the full $329,000. If it comes in half that, then unfortunately we lose half of 329,000. And there's also the decrease in there for the expenditure restraint program in the 2024 budget versus 23. So I'll quickly go through some of the estimated year-end projections for the budget. Fortunately, we have $751,000 more in revenue in the general fund than what we projected in the budget, primarily from additional building permit revenue. That was the Lydell building in Bayshore, as well as the Johnson Control. Those permits were extraordinary. We hope we see that again in 2024. We don't project that in the budget just to be conservative. And as we know, interest rates are going up. So there was an increase in the budgeted revenue for increased interest earnings. We are projected a $268,000 deficit in 23, like previously stated. We were able to cut that nearly in half from almost a $600,000 deficit in the budget. Fortunately, in the water and storm sewer funds, we project them totally to operate at about $1.1 million surplus. The budget projected a $278,000 surplus. Part of that is the delay in doing a number of projects as a result of the I-43 project. So we spent less in doing ditching and other programs because of the I-43 projects. As you can see, we project surpluses in some of the other special revenue funds listed below, including special events, the Richard E. Maslowski Community Park, and the North Shore Municipal Court. We do start to see operating as a deficit. We see it in 23 and 24. There are less tickets being written, so there are less prosecutions and less revenue in the North Shore Court, at least in the last several years. Any other questions on 23 Nope. Well, I will move on to the exciting 2024 budget. I have a few more slides with this one, so I'll go through these. So essentially, this is the budget structure. As you guys know, the village or the city primarily operates with a general fund with the different functions listed below. The new one here, which we will propose with a budget amendment, is to add a finance division or function to the budget. Wasn't in the original 23 budget, so that's an addition in 24, and we will make a budget amendment for that in 23. We have the water and sewer operating budget, which we also call proprietary funds, and then the special event funds and the capital funds listed below. Each one of those special funds has their own revenue and expense sources, and the water and sewer obviously does too, and the majority of them do not use property taxes. So here's some of the major assumptions that we have in the budget. Obviously, we talked about expenditure restraints, adhering to the levy limit requirements. We didn't assume any fee increases for any of the things listed there, including water, storm sewer, or sanitary. We will make a rate case to the PSC for our water utility rates, as we have been authorized to do so. Not knowing the timing of when those rate increases would occur or if it would occur in 2024, we did not assume any additional revenue in the budget.
How long would that take?
The guess is either third or fourth quarter of 24 or the first quarter of 25. We have no increases in full-time positions in any city departments. We are proposing 2 part-time additions in the police department for a community service officer, which we can discuss later. It does assume wage adjustments and health insurance adjustments per the city's policy. It assumes all the new costs, which we'll talk about for the North Shore intergovernmental agreements for library, health, fire, dispatch and other ones, as well as all the capital improvements that were consistent with the adopted 5-year capital plan by the city council. Does make one exception to the not liking of the chief, which is to not have the design of the new police department in there for 2024. The idea there is we want to get a better hold on our debt and bring that to the city council so we can all be on the same page with what our debt limitations will be moving forward before we design that. There's some big debt falling off in 26 and 27. So if we move forward with it, it might be a design in 25, construction 26, payment in 27, something like that. So here's the proposed major amendments for the budget, which you might have seen. The Public Works Fund had about $1 million decrease. Part of that was because we used to put all the administrative expenses for city administrator, deputy administrator in the general fund, and then the water and sewer fund would then reimburse the general fund. We're just going to, in this budget, directly allocate those expenses to those funds so we don't have to worry about transferring money later and overinflating our costs. As well as in the environmental fund, it used to transfer the money there to then pay the cost for garbage service to GFL in the general fund. Instead of transferring the money and making the payment in general fund, the draft budget proposes just to make the payment directly out of the environmental fund. Those two things caused for about $1 million in less funding in the general fund. So we actually do see a decrease in spending in the general fund by about 2% overall. Like I said, capital projects were approved, were put in there, expenditures, additional expenditures for special events per the new special events committee were placed in there, as well as the existing expenses for the current, special events that we have for Music in the Glen and, 4th of July. Additional costs for 2 part-time community service officer positions. Those 2 positions would, take responsibility for property maintenance, away from the superintendent of public works, who needs to spend more time on public works functions rather than property maintenance, as well as some traffic control and other on the road assistance for the police department. We've also included in here a replacement plan for computer workstations. We propose to do about 10 workstations a year at a 40 workstations, about a 4-year replacement cycle for each computer workstation here at the city. So that's included in this budget as well as in future one. We also have higher costs for the clerk to fund the 4 elections that will occur in 2024. So that was a significant increase in expenses as well.
I applaud some of the transparency of this. Some of the other transfers that have been made in the past aren't useful for how things run. So those are good changes.
Thank you. So here's our revenue by type. We kind of saw this with property taxes. We really have, 2 major revenue sources that account for 3/4 of our revenue, which is water and sewer rates and charges, and then property taxes accounts for most of it. And there's the other list. This is total revenue across all funds, not just the general fund. This is the same thing, just shown again. This just demonstrates, property taxes is nearly $14 million and $6.5 million for water and sewer payments. So I'll just go through these quick. This is, sort of the expenses by type. People ask where the city spends their money on. Most of the city's money goes to, salaries and benefits, which is 9.9 million. About 70% of that is dedicated towards our police department, who does a fantastic job for us. You gotta love them. And then the other intergovernmental $8.2 million, the majority of that is dedicated towards North Shore Fire, but it also includes library dispatching, North Shore Health, water and sewer treatment for MMSD, as well as the North Shore Water Commission. We'll break these out real quick. Like we said, on this chart here, I was told to put this one last, but I guess I didn't listen. That, for personnel reasons, most of it is public safety. I told the chief today I was going to try to stack up all the other ones next to it to see if we could equal it, and I don't think it will, but it's their biggest expense, obviously, for personnel related. Contractual expenses, if you guys have any specific questions on this, Charlie's here. Most of these big ones are related to public works functions. for maintenance in our utility system, as well as the pickup of refuge and recycling with GFL. Economic Development represents our contract with Safe Built for building inspections, as well as the payment for Welcome to Glendale for their tourism entity support. The last one is intergovernmental expenses. As you can see, again, the majority of this is North Shore Fire Services, and the rest of them probably come pretty close to adding up to that as a totality for the city's intergovernmental expenses. But as you can see, we rely heavily on our intergovernmental efforts to provide services to our residents. We do that across the many communities to reduce overhead and provide many cost savings to the city. I think we're a model for most communities of how, you know, people should follow it to try to keep costs down as much as possible.
Where are we at in the library as far as change? When do things change?
So the building is still under construction. I believe the shell will get turned over sometime next spring. And then the interior construction will take place, and that'll take, I think they said 8 months to a year.
They have enough funding to start on that aspect? Because I think they're up to 9 million when they were.
It is
last
their,
reported.
it is their goal to have all of the money for the interior construction by the time the shell gets handed over to them. So Carl and I had the opportunity to meet the other day with some representatives from the library's fundraiser, as well as one of the president of the library board. And they went through essentially everything they're working on right now and shared with us a number of very exciting prospects. So
Didn't they promise to show?
they did. And when I
They
reached,
promised more than once, but I mean, even to show up once.
yes, and so when I reached out to schedule the meeting, I think there was confusion, and so it ended up being Carl and me meeting with them the other day instead of a council meeting. But I did say that we needed to have her come to a council meeting, so that will get scheduled.
Once every couple of years, you'd like to have someone tell you the truth.
I have seen, by the way, they do have something on the North Shore Library website with the foundation, so, but I think it was last updated September. So it's not that old, but still, I agree, having like a little more insight would be nice.
But I will just go area by area, and again, interrupt me if you have any questions. We'll talk about the general fund first. 68% of the general fund is funded by property taxes. The other majority is intergovernmental, which is basically state shared revenue that we receive from the state of Wisconsin. The rest of it adds up to having 100% of revenue for the general fund. General fund is projected to have revenue about $54,000 lower than we budgeted in 23. The majority of that is because we eliminate that transfer from the environmental fund to $517,000. We do see about the same amount in increases for interest earnings and new state shared revenue. You know, despite the interest earnings being $215,000 higher than what we had budgeted in 23, we probably could have made them higher, but we just wanted to make sure we were conservative in those efforts, because you never know what's going to happen with interest rates. These are the expenses by function. I did a pie chart here, so I didn't call out public safety again, but it is 72% of the general fund budget. Public works is 12. All the other stuff is, I shouldn't say small, but it's a small amount of the total 100% of the city's general fund budget. And public safety, of course, does include fire and dispatch in there, so it's not just police. So for expenses, they're projected to be $275,000 lower than they were budgeted in 2023. Salaries and health insurance are decreased because a lot of those costs are being directly allocated towards water, sanitary, and storm rather than being reimbursed. Contractual costs will decrease nearly $400,000 because of the refuge contract of 517. If you take that out of perspective, all other contractual costs within the general fund would increase about $130,000. North Shore contracts increased nearly $230,000. Obviously, a majority of that is the North Shore fire increase of $198,000. Any other questions on the general fund? So this is the proprietary fund, like we talked about before. We have not seen any rate increases since 17 and 18 for these funds. We will be performing a rate analysis with the PSC for the water utility. There are no property taxes levied on the utility fund. It's all revenue that's gained from the utility bill sent to individual homes and businesses. So as part of this fund, we continue all maintenance activities, ditching program, everything that we've excluded from before is now included in the budget. Water main program, it now includes all debt service payments within the fund, salary and benefits paid directly, and it continues the ditching program that was suspended in 2023. I believe the 24 program is Clovernook, Charlie. Unless they're too inundated with construction, then we'll.
Right.
So here's just a breakdown of the expenses for the proprietary fund, water, storm and sanitary, with water obviously being the most at $5.4 million. I just wanted to provide this one other slide. I don't know if we provided it before, but this is sort of a breakdown of where the money goes when we talk about these three funds. Bottom number, which is the yellow, is the salary and benefits. Middle number is the contractual amount, which is mainly maintenance on the system. After that, the other one is in orange. The majority of those expenses are debt services related to each of the funds. And then the top one is the intergovernmental expenses only in water and sanitary, and those are for water treatment and water from North Shore Water, and the MMSD expenses that we pay to MMSD for sanitary sewer. Any questions on proprietary?
At 2,000,007, that was all debt service for water? Or
It's
is it-
1.8 million, actually, I believe is the debt service number. So other
Okay.
costs is about 900,000 for water sewer. I don't know off the top of my head what that
Right,
is,
thank
but 1.8 of that, yes, is debt. It is for sanitary and for storm, it is virtually all of it though, because it's 118 for sanitary and for storm, 110 is the debt payment. So next we'll talk about the special revenue funds. I'll just go through these, basically show the same sheet that's in the budget summary report. I've starred two of these. Those are the only two special revenue funds that receive property taxes to help fund the operations of those. First one is environmental. I tried to include some pictures in here, so it gives little kids like me a better idea of what we're spending our money on. So we have the GFL truck here that I stole from the internet. Environmental fund essentially pays for all the costs related to the garbage service for GFL. Recycling is paid somewhere else, but the environmental fund is a line on the utility bill that pays for garbage collection for residential. So police acquisition, this is money that's spent so police can, purchase specific equipment. We did throw in $34,000 in expenses. As I said in the memo, we don't have a specific plan for those expenses. It was just to reserve amount in case an emergency purchase like a helicopter. And there was required.
I hate to
'cause
break
that's
it
the
to you,
next-
but the helicopter at 34 grand is gonna be tough.
It's a drone helicopter.
That's 1 week's repair bill.
I didn't put in here not to scale, but hey, he asked for a helicopter, so I had to put it in. It's either solar panels or a helicopter. What do you? It would be more fun. That would make National Night Out pretty good if we had a helicopter ride. So the next one is crime prevention. This is the main revenue source, which will fund a future new canine unit for the city, I believe, Chief. Is that correct? The crime prevention fund?
But yes, the crime prevention fund includes, the biggest money in there is our canine funds that we get, and all the canine. Everything, all costs for canine squads, the dog, everything is paid through donations. So we are self-supporting the canine program, and we have raised enough to look at a replacement for whenever the next dog goes. So we're in the process of looking at that.
And I did forget to mention in the general fund that we had two additional expenses that were approved here by the city council, which was $23,000 annually for the cloud storage for body cameras and police squads, and then $35,000 annually for the taser replacement program. So those are both in the general fund, as well as $15,000 more for additional cybersecurity. So technology starts to add up, but we need to make sure that we are safe. So I forgot to mention those before. Next is Economic Development Fund. This is if the city receives funds for any proposed billboard expansions in the city. You know, the funding of this would go towards various economic developments and zoning projects, hence the zoning map in here. We would not begin any of those projects until that money, or if that money is received by the city. Recycling fund, a portion of this revenue comes from property taxes. The other comes from a grant from the state to fund the city's recycling operations with GFL. And these all assume the new current rates that were proposed in the contract. This is the last year of the GFL contract. Mr. Imbig and I have already interviewed 3 contractors for possible work in 25. So stay tuned to that for action in 2024. But these contractual costs include the maximum increases allowed in the contract, which is a 5% CPI, because as we can see, CPI is higher than that. So we've maxed it out the last couple of years. The hotel room tax fund, it is doing very well. We project about $1.2 million in 23. We took that down as a conservative mark to $1 million in 2024. 64.29%, don't know who made the rounding on this one, goes to the city's general fund, and the remainder, which is 35.71%, must go to an outside community development organization. Here it's Welcome to Glendale for promotion services to basically put heads in beds. The fund is doing really well, and that means people are staying in hotels in Glendale. Special events fund, we do have a deficit in here. I know Joanne was going to be worried about that. I didn't increase any revenue for donations to sort of mark off the additional expenses for special events, because I didn't want to assume anything that may or may not be there, but that will of course be the discussions when we have our meeting. But just so you know, that's why there is a deficit there, because the additional expenses were put in there and some revenue from the general fund, but obviously not enough to cover the additional expenses that were put in there. Health and Human Services, this covers the retiree health insurance benefits. There's a fund balance to cover the deficit, as well as I've seen in specific years, we've always over budgeted the expenses. So I didn't want to take additional money away from the general fund if it's not necessary. So this is something that will be evaluated year by year, but that's the sort of reason for. Am I done? No, 2024. REM Park, I found this nice picture of one of our concerts out at the park. We do project a slight surplus in the REM Community Park Fund, which accounts for all the revenue and expenses associated with the Oasis, the Van Horn Community Room, and the amphitheater. I know in the budget summary report, I had the old one, but I double checked, and now the names have changed, obviously.
All better.
The second to last one, or maybe the last one, is North Shore Municipal Court. We do project a deficit going into 2024. As you will notice, the revenue and expenses is much higher than what we've probably seen in the past. In the past, some expenditures were simply offsetting revenues. We've taken those out and listed revenue as an expenditure separately for the North Shore Municipal Court. So the revenue and expenses represents a much higher number.
So the revenues, the 670,000, is that what we expect to actually collect? Because we do know from past council meetings where we had a conversation with the judge that we're sitting on millions in uncollected revenue. So how do you budget the revenue? You budget on what you actually expect to come in, or what actually is assigned as a fine, whether or not it gets paid?
So Mary Bursch and myself sat down with his budget to try to carefully calculate what the revenue was going to be. You know, being very careful not to rely on that past revenue that has not been received by the city, and simply rely for this number on the expected tickets that we're supposed to write and the revenue we collect for 2024. So hopefully we outperform this by collecting some of the past revenue.
Thank you.
Carl, just looking at it looks like you skipped the American Rescue Plan.
I skipped. It's the last one here, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I got these a little out of order. The last two are out of
I'll
order.
let you go ahead then.
Yeah, the ARPA one, I just put last because it's probably a fund that will disappear in 26 or 27 once all the expenditures are spent. We have about $1.3 million sitting in there. We've done one public hearing and a survey regarding the use of these funds. That's something that as a staff, we're going to bring back to you guys probably early November to have further discussions after we sort of wrap up these preliminary budget discussions.
So it shows a deficit of 735,000. I'm not quite sure how that is.
It shows a deficit because some of the revenue was received in previous years. And just from a year by year budget perspective, we received like 750 in one year. So you had a surplus, and then you received 750 in the next year. And then now in 2024, so we received the revenue in 22 and 23. We project to spend half of it, I'm just estimating, in 24, and then the other half in 2025. So it's basically using the fund balance of money already received to pay for a potential project in 24. I made my best guess on how much we'd spend in 24. It could be the full 1.3 million, or it could be half that amount. Depends on how expeditiously we move through the process. So next is the capital funds. This includes our capital fund as well as TIF 7 and TIF 8. TIF 7 is the technology district TIF, which the city borrowed for. We have 2 loan payments left on that. One expires in 25 and the other one expires in 2028. TIF 8 is the Bayshore Development Agreement. That is an increment that is calculated and paid directly to Bayshore. They have all the debt on that, so we do not have any debt related to the Bayshore capital. This next slide here is the 5-year, is the capital plan proposed for 2024. I have a link to it here. You guys also have it in the packets there, which I can certainly bring up any questions. It exactly mirrors the 5-year capital plan for 24 that was adopted several months ago by the Common Council. Of course, it does not include the police station design engineering as indicated in there. And then there was a couple additions that were made and 2 carryovers. We're proposing to do a corp plan that expires this year. We're required to have that in order to receive any grants for any parks and recreational programs that we do. It's essentially a planning function for park structures in the city. And, you know, Charlie and John have gone through this more than I. If you have any questions about that project, they can certainly answer it for you, but we bring back any project for that. It's essentially a comprehensive plan for park services, for trails and parks and items like that. When's the last time we had one approved, Charlie? 5 years ago. When we're required to do it every 5 years? Yeah.
I was gonna say.
Then the other item on here is express votes. Megan can more explain those if anyone has any questions. It's $24,000 for 6 machines, I believe.
Those are the machines that are used during in-person absentee voting. So they're the ones that we see out here. If you've ever come in during in-person absentee, they're also used at the polling place instead of the old AutoMark handicap accessible machines. So it would allow for 2 per district, so that during like a larger election like the ones we have next year, people wouldn't hopefully have to wait as long because they're programmed by district. So.
Then also we have on there 2 carryover items, which is new building department software to allow us to take that into the web so people can apply online for building. We've done a lot of research on that. We just haven't narrowed down a software for building department, and then a document scanner to help us more expeditiously scan some of the documents that are here in paper format. Again, a project that we did not get to in 23 that we will hopefully carry over to 24. The last part of this is debt services. This is really where Jolene and Christina particularly spent a lot of time trying to go over what debt load that the city has. We now have, this is the debt service by function with Alderman Schmelzling was looking before, and you know, water is 1.8 million with a small amount for storm and sanitary. The TIF for the TIF 7 is $2.1 million. And the city's debt obligation on here is $4 million. As I've said before, the debt for the general fund is 3.1 million because that represents last year's debt number. We'll always be a year behind in our debt. So if our debt number increases, will always be a year behind in paying for it. In 2025, we will be able to levy this $4 million to pay for the increased debt load. And again, this is the result of the two big projects that we had this year. So that's the story for debt services. And this is the breakdown. And in the budget now, we have each of the notes listed there. And they are all 10-year notes. So we will have a couple big ones expire in 26 and 27. Any questions on debt? I think that is it. We do have the public hearing scheduled for November 13th. We did bring the schedule to you guys, which had it at the next meeting. We thought with the ability to get out a public hearing notice and any feedback from the Common Council, we wanted to give it an extra couple weeks. It's typically when we've done it before. I got a little overzealous with my time period, so we propose to do it on November 13th. And is there any other questions on the proposed or draft 24 budget?
Thank you for doing the review online with feedback that we can do this year. So now that I've gotten through this, I'll start to dig in a little bit further. I'm sure I'll have some questions, but thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, that concludes our agenda then. Thank you very much for a thoughtful presentation. Appreciate that. And I would entertain now a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
By Gelhardt, seconded by Doherty. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.
For the Packer game.
Over 30,000 all year.